The blackout began around 9:42 p.m. I remember the time exactly, not because I was watching the clock, but because the old wall one in the kitchen stopped ticking the second the lights went out. I hadn't noticed the silence right away. The kind that creeps in beneath the surface, replacing every hum and buzz you didn't realize was there. I'd been staying at my parents' place for the week while they traveled to Lahore for a cousin's wedding I skipped out on. I told them it was work, but really, I just needed quiet. I was between shifts at the hospital, and the old family home, tucked at the end of a narrow, tree-lined street in Rawalpindi, seemed like the best place to breathe. The day had been humid, the kind of June heat that clings even after sunset. I had all the windows open, hoping for a breeze, but the air stayed still. There was something unsettling about how unmoving everything was outside. The curtains didn't stir. The leaves didn't rustle. When the electricity cut out, I assumed it was the usual load shedding. Annoying, but not unusual. I lit a candle and set it on the table beside the couch. The flame bent slightly, though there was no draft. I wasn't afraid. Not yet. The quiet felt wider somehow. As if the world had pulled back a little. Like someone holding their breath too close to your ear. I told myself I was being dramatic. I picked up my phone to check for messages. The signal was gone, no bars. That was odd, this area always had coverage. I tried toggling airplane mode, but nothing returned. The streetlights outside were dead too. Usually, the one across from the house flickered like a dying insect, annoying but constant. Now, there was only a dull, heavy blackness pressing against the windows. No headlights. No voices. No dogs barking in the distance. I stepped onto the veranda for air. The night was thick. Every sound I made, my slippers scuffing the tile, the door creaking behind me, seemed too loud, like it didn't belong. And still, not a single breeze. I leaned against the column, staring at the end of the street, trying to make out the shapes of trees and parked cars. But it all blended into one flat void. No depth. No movement. Then I saw something. A shape, or maybe just a gap, in the dark across the street. It wasn't moving. It wasn't lit. It wasn't even clear. Just a piece of the dark that looked different from the rest. Slightly denser, maybe? Or slightly less. I blinked hard. Rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, it was gone. Or had never been there. Inside, I found myself locking the door more quietly than usual. I told myself it was habit, not fear. I checked the kitchen. The fridge was still humming. I opened it, and the sound died instantly. Everything inside had started to sweat. I shut it quickly. The soft click echoed too long. The clock still read 9:42. The candle had burned lower than I expected. The wax had spilled onto the wood, hardened like a frozen spill. I scratched at it absently while pacing the living room. Every footstep felt slightly delayed, like the sound was following me by a beat. I glanced at the window. I don't know why. There was no movement, no change. Just the same black outside, wrapped tight around the house. Then the power came back. But only for a second. The lights flickered once, sharp, sudden, and I heard the fan above me jerk alive before it died again. That brief flash was enough to see the living room in stark detail. The shadows clung too close to the corners. Like they hadn't been caught off guard by the light. The silence that followed was worse than before. As if whatever sound had been pushed out of the room had now decided not to come back. I tried the switch again. Nothing. I sat down on the couch, holding my phone like a weapon. Still no signal. No Wi-Fi. Just that dead time between connection and disconnection where the world forgets you exist. From somewhere in the house, farther back, maybe near the hallway, I heard a soft, padded sound. Not sharp like footsteps. More like something dragging softly against the floor. Just once. Then nothing. I didn't move. The flame trembled on the candle. I told myself it was the house settling. Wood expands in the heat. Maybe a curtain shifted. Maybe a book fell. Maybe nothing happened at all. Still, I stood up slowly and walked to the hallway. The darkness there was thicker. Like walking into syrup. I didn't enter it. Just stood at the edge, where the candlelight barely reached. I waited. No more sounds. No breathing. No footsteps. Just that pressure again, like being watched. Not directly. Not from in front of me. From somewhere behind. Not a presence, exactly. Just the idea of one. Then the whistling started. Very faint. Far outside. It wasn't a tune. Just two low notes, back and forth. Barely audible. But steady. Almost like someone practicing how to whistle, not quite getting it right. I froze. The whistling stopped. Then it started again, closer. I blew out the candle. I don't know why. It was instinct. Like I thought whatever was out there couldn't see me if I stayed still and dark. The house filled with that absolute absence. No light. No sound. No safety. I stood there in the black, my breath small in my throat. After a long moment, the sound returned. But this time, it wasn't a whistle. It was a knock. Very soft. At the back door. One knock only. Not urgent. Not loud. Just patient. I didn't move. The knock didn't come again. I just stood there. Waiting for something else. Something worse. And for the first time that night, I truly felt alone. Not just alone in the house. But unreachable. Like the world had gone somewhere else, and left me paused in between seconds. It was still 9:42. And the clock hadn't moved. I must have stood there in the dark for 10 minutes, maybe more. The knock hadn't come again. Neither had the whistling. But somehow that was worse. Eventually I moved. Not because I felt brave, but because staying still made me feel like prey. I lit the candle again, careful to shield the flame with one hand as if something outside might see it. The house looked unchanged, but only on the surface. The kind of unchanged where everything seems like a stage set after the actors have left, quiet, but not peaceful. The hallway felt narrower than I remembered. I walked slowly, candle trembling slightly in my grip. The flickering light revealed small things, dust floating in the air, the soft scuff of my own slippers against the tiles. A door frame I hadn't noticed was chipped. I checked the back door. Locked. Still bolted. Nothing outside the frosted glass. Just that thick, almost touchable black pressing back at me. I placed my ear against the wood. Silence. Then I caught something strange. Not a sound, more like the absence of one. A missing echo. Like the quiet here was different from the rest of the house. More tuned. I moved back quickly and left the kitchen. It was still 9:42. The clock hadn't moved. No ticking, just that frozen moment. I tried pulling out the batteries, but they weren't dead. I replaced them anyway. Still nothing. The hands remained stuck. I laughed a little, one of those short, dry laughs you make when your mind doesn't know what else to do. I whispered, "You've got to be kidding me." And it sounded too loud in the room. I sat back down on the couch and checked my phone again. No signal. I held it above my head, toward the window, walked around the room. Still nothing. The signal bar remained empty. I didn't know what time it was anymore. My phone clock still read 9:42. Everything did. My watch. The oven. Even the old digital alarm clock in the guest room that had its own backup battery showed the same time. That's when I realized it wasn't just the kitchen clock. Every timepiece in the house was stuck. At exactly 9:42. It was subtle, but it did something to my head. Like being in a place where time didn't exist the same way. Where you couldn't trust how long a second felt. Every moment started to stretch. I tried to focus on normal things. I stood up, went to the bookshelf, pulled out a book I'd brought with me, some novel I never got around to reading. I opened it at random, just to keep my hands busy. But the words swam on the page. Not in a dizzying way, more like they didn't want to settle into meaning. Like they were waiting for me to stop pretending this was normal. I closed it again and set it down, spine outward. That's when I noticed something across the room. The photo. My parents keep this old family picture on the side table, me as a child between them, all of us smiling, eyes bright. It's always there, angled just slightly toward the hallway. But now, it was facing me. I hadn't moved it. I walked over slowly and picked it up. It wasn't just turned, someone had repositioned it. The frame was smudged. A fingerprint across the glass. Not mine. I stood there, holding it, and my hands began to sweat. The candle's flame fluttered harder, casting uneven shadows across the walls. Then I heard the creak of a floorboard. Not behind me. Not upstairs. Above me. There's no attic in this house. Just an old crawlspace with no ladder, barely wide enough to hold insulation. No one's been up there in years. I looked up. The ceiling fan above me hung still, blades casting long bent shapes across the ceiling. No light. No sound. I waited. Nothing. Still, I fetched the broom from the kitchen and gently prodded the crawlspace panel near the hallway. It didn't move. I didn't open it. I just stood there with the broom in hand, feeling stupid and nervous and entirely aware that something wasn't right. As I lowered the broom, I heard the front doorknob shift. Just slightly. Not turning. Not rattling. Just tension. The subtle pop of pressure as if someone placed their hand on it, unsure whether to turn. I stepped back and held my breath. Then it stopped. I didn't approach. I didn't call out. I just walked to the couch, set down the candle, and sat. The silence returned, and for the first time, I realized how much sound a house usually holds. A hum here, a creak there. Air moving. Something alive. This house felt dead. I whispered to myself. Okay. Like saying it might anchor me. Then I turned on the radio. It's one of those old battery-powered ones, kept around for power cuts. I figured if I could just hear something, it would help. I turned the dial slowly, passing through waves of static. But nothing landed. No station. No voice. Just one long chain of white noise that rose and fell like breath. Then, for a second, I thought I heard something. A voice? A hum? I leaned in. It was faint. Very faint. It almost sounded like someone breathing too close to the mic. No words. No music. Then, layered beneath it, a low, broken whistle. Same two notes. Back and forth. Back and forth. I turned the radio off. The sound kept going. But not from the radio. From outside the living room window. Closer now. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. Then it stopped. A second passed. Then another. Then came the tapping. Very slow. 3 soft taps against the glass. Not knocking. Not trying to get in. Just enough to say, I know you're awake. I didn't get up. I didn't look. I just sat there, still, and waited for the sound to stop. And eventually it did. But the silence that followed, it stayed. I think the quiet eventually wore me down. At some point, I must have drifted off, sitting upright on the couch, the candle long melted, the house completely dark. I don't remember falling asleep. I only remember waking up. My eyes opened to nothing. Total black. For a second, I thought I'd gone blind. The kind of black you can't even feel around you. No depth, no texture. Just absence. The air had changed. It was heavier, like the house had filled with something that wasn't air. Something too still. My mouth was dry. My hands were cold. I checked my phone again, more out of habit than hope. Still no signal. Still 9:42. The battery hadn't dropped a single %. I stood up carefully, arms out to steady myself in the dark. My feet were stiff, legs shaky. As I moved, the floor felt different, slightly soft, like there was a thin layer of dust or ash coating it. But I couldn't see anything. Even the outline of the window was gone. I thought maybe the power had returned and the blackout curtains were just pulled too tightly. But when I reached the window and peeled the fabric aside, there was nothing beyond. No street. No tree line. No faint moonlight. It was like the world had been erased outside the glass. I pressed my forehead to the pane. Cold. Solid. Real. And yet, something felt wrong. Then I heard it again. A creak above me. Just one. I backed away slowly, step by step. The room felt warped. Wider than before, like the walls had shifted a little in the night. I moved to the kitchen and flicked the light switch. Nothing. I opened the fridge. It didn't hum. The bulb inside was dark. The cold had bled out. Every container inside felt slightly damp, like they'd been sitting untouched for days. The clock on the stove still read 9:42. I don't know why that detail kept bothering me more than anything else. Maybe because everything else was subtle, off, but explainable. But this, every clock, frozen at the exact second the blackout started, it felt deliberate. Like something had chosen that moment to pin me here. I needed to leave the house. I walked to the front door and undid the bolt, then turned the knob. It resisted, just a little. Not stuck, just slightly reluctant. I pulled harder. The door opened, but what lay beyond wasn't the street. It was black. Not darkness, black. Thick, infinite. No porch, no trees, no driveway. Just an unlit void pressing right up to the threshold like fog made of ink. I didn't step out. I shut the door again, slowly. Locked it. Then stood with my hand on the wood for a long time, listening. Nothing. I tried the back door. Same. Wherever the house was now, it wasn't where I left it. I sat on the kitchen floor and leaned my head against the fridge. I wasn't tired, but I felt the kind of weight that makes you want to lie down just to feel smaller. As if the house had grown too big around me. I tried to remember how long it had been. How many hours since the power cut. My body said one thing. My mind another. The clocks all said the same, 9:42. I whispered to myself. Just a storm, maybe. Something temporary. I said it softly, as if something might hear. A few minutes passed. Then I heard movement again. This time from inside the walls. Not scratching. Not footsteps. More like a shift in pressure. Like something sliding through pipes that weren't built for it. It passed from one end of the house to the other, slow, measured. I stayed still. Then the hallway light flickered once. Just once. No power. No sound. Just that one, impossible flicker. And in that single flash, I saw something standing at the very end of the hallway. Not detailed. Just a shape. Pale, thin. Arms slightly too long. Not moving. Then darkness returned. I didn't go toward it. I didn't run either. I sat there, still as I could manage, and waited. No more flickers. No sound. But the feeling didn't leave. That undeniable sensation of being watched. From far away. From very close. The worst part wasn't fear. It was the thought that maybe this had already happened. Maybe I wasn't remembering something strange. I was trapped in it. Looping. Repeating. I stood up and went to the guest room. There was a mirror there, above the dresser. I hadn't looked in it since I arrived. The room was completely black, but I could feel the mirror in front of me. Cold air touched my face differently there, and I knew I was close. I raised my phone, turned on the flashlight. Just a thin beam of white, enough to see myself. But the face that stared back wasn't quite mine. It looked like me. Same shape. Same eyes. But wrong in small ways. The mouth didn't move when I whispered. The reflection blinked slightly out of sync. I shut the light off. Left the room. Closed the door behind me. I returned to the living room. The photo of my family was still there, but the image was blank. The glass intact. Frame unchanged. But the picture itself was just an empty background now. No figures. No smiles. I sat back on the couch. And that's where I stayed. Time didn't pass. The clocks didn't change. Nothing knocked again. Nothing whistled. But I know it's still there, whatever it is. Outside the window. Behind the walls. Inside the crawl space that doesn't exist. And every time I blink, I expect to open my eyes and see 9:43. But I never do. I moved into the apartment on a Thursday afternoon. It was raining when I arrived, thick, directionless Karachi rain, the kind that makes the air smell like rust and wet concrete. The building was old, 12 stories tall, faded yellow paint peeling off in long strips, with those boxy, wire mesh balconies that always seem a little too shallow to stand on. Work had relocated me for 3 months. Temporary assignment. A client insisted on in-person meetings, and the office was 2 blocks away. My company arranged the flat through a local agent, Unit 4B, 4th floor, corner side. It wasn't fancy, but it had a decent view of the street. You could see the little pawn shop across the road and the overflowing gutter that refused to be fixed, no matter how often someone complained. It felt functional. Quiet. Exactly what I thought I wanted. The apartment had that stillness old places have. Not dusty or unclean, just paused. Like it had been waiting, not empty, but listening. The neighbors weren't chatty. An older couple on 4A nodded politely when I passed. A man on 5C wore headphones and never made eye contact. No one was rude. Just removed. The elevator didn't work the first day. Someone had left a note taped crooked to the button: load shedding, use stairs. That was normal. I wasn't surprised. Karachi's power went out like clockwork during monsoon months. I took the stairs. All concrete, narrow turns, lit by dim yellow bulbs and cages overhead. The air there was stale and metallic, like forgotten batteries. That night, the lights went out around 9:15 p.m. I had just finished dinner, plain rice and dal reheated from a tiffin service I'd subscribed to. I washed the plate and left it to dry, then sat near the window with my phone, watching the distant headlights swim through the downpour. Outside, the city dimmed into its usual post-blackout silence. I don't remember exactly when I heard it. Maybe 10 minutes in. A soft ding, like an elevator arriving. It made me look up. The hallway was dark, of course. The generator downstairs only powered the lobby and 1 stair light per floor. But the sound was unmistakable. I opened my door and stepped into the hall. Nothing. Just the faint glow from the stairwell behind the grated door. I walked to the elevator, more curious than concerned. The panel was dead. No buttons lit, no power. But the metal doors looked slightly off, like they weren't fully sealed. I pressed the button anyway. Nothing. I stood there a moment, listening. There was no one. No footsteps. Just that deep, concrete silence. I went back inside. Didn't think much of it then. I figured maybe a sound from the floor above had echoed down. Old buildings do that, carry noise in strange ways. I went to bed early. The next morning, I mentioned it offhand to the man from 5C. He was standing near the mailboxes, scrolling his phone. I just said, "Did the elevator come on last night for a second?" He didn't look up. Just muttered, "Does that sometimes?" and walked off. Not rude, but not inviting either. The next night, it happened again. Same time, roughly. Power out. City quiet. The soft ding, just once. This time I didn't get up. I stayed seated by the window and waited. Nothing followed. No doors. No movement. Just that subtle wait again, like the hallway was holding its breath. I slept late. Over the next few days, I started noticing small things. The stairwell light on the 4th floor always flickered once before going out completely. Just the 4th. Never the 5th. Never the 3rd. My intercom would crackle faintly around the same hour the blackout hit, even when I hadn't touched it. Like it was picking up some background buzz, the way old radios do when they're too close to something they shouldn't be near. Once, when the rain had stopped, I stepped out onto the balcony. I leaned over to see the street and caught a glimpse of the top floor, 12th. There was a window directly across, lit by candlelight. A silhouette passed behind the curtain. I hadn't realized anyone lived up there. The elevator never stopped at the 12th, I'd noticed. At least not that I saw. In fact, there was no button for it inside the lift when it was working the following morning. That night, the blackout came earlier, 8:57 p.m. I was brushing my teeth when the lights blinked twice and vanished. My phone buzzed. No signal. I didn't bother looking. I stepped out into the hallway again, without knowing why. I told myself it was just to grab the delivery bag I'd left hanging on the door handle. But as soon as I was out there, I heard it again. Ding. Same soft tone. Same pause. This time, the elevator doors were open. Not wide. Just enough to see a sliver of inside. A thin black crack of nothing. No light in the shaft. No sound. But something felt there. Not movement. Not presence. Just the sense that the door shouldn't be open at all. The floor was still without power. I stepped closer. The panel beside the lift was unlit. My reflection in the metal was faint, warped by the curve. I didn't look inside. Not then. I backed away and returned to my apartment, locking the door softly. As I sat down again, I realized I'd never heard the elevator move. Not once. Not up. Not down. Just the tone. Just the door. Just the waiting. The rest of the night, I left all my lights off. I stayed near the window again, watching the distant skyline fade. No traffic. No honks. Just the occasional bark of a street dog echoing through empty alleys. Around midnight, I walked back to the hallway. The doors were closed again. No sound. But a faint wet footprint, just one, marked the tile near the elevator. I stood there for a long while, staring at it. I live alone. And it hadn't been raining. By the following week, I'd stopped asking questions. Whatever I thought was strange the first few nights, those soft elevator chimes, the flickering stair lights, the vanishing signal, it had all become part of the building's rhythm. Karachi teaches you not to expect order in old structures. Cracks in concrete, power cuts, bad wiring, no one calls those things out loud what they really are. You just adapt. I told myself I was adapting. But I started keeping track. Quietly. Without meaning to. Every night, at almost the same minute, the elevator would ding once during the blackout. Never twice. Never more. It was always followed by stillness. I kept waiting for someone to comment on it. For a neighbor to ask, "Did you hear that again?" But no one did. The people on my floor rarely left their apartments after dark. The man in 5C still passed me without eye contact. I stopped trying to nod at him. One evening, I caught the elevator working around 5:30 p.m., a rare window when power was stable. I stepped in alone. The fluorescent ceiling flickered slightly, humming in that tired, uneven way. The buttons were old, the kind that clicked instead of lighting up. 1 through 11. Then R. Number 12. No button for the top floor I had seen lit by candlelight. Just R for roof. I pressed it. The elevator shook slightly, then began rising. The numbers ticked upward, slow and deliberate. When we reached 11, there was a slight hesitation. Not a stop. Just a pause. Like something adjusting its grip. Then it continued. When the doors opened, I was on the rooftop. It looked as expected, unfinished concrete, rusting water tanks, some discarded wooden planks pushed to the edge. Pigeons flapped off at the sound of the doors. But something was wrong. From where I stood, I should have been able to see the lit window I'd seen days earlier, the one I thought was on the 12th floor. But there was nothing above me. Just sky. No floor. No hidden room. Only open air. I stayed there for a while, letting the wind push against my shirt. The city stretched out below, gray and humid, smeared with low clouds. I walked to the edge and looked down. The balconies all stacked neatly, 11 rows, then ground. There was no 12th level. And yet I had seen a window lit from within. That night, the power went out later than usual. Around 10:11 p.m. I remember the time because I had just finished replying to an email when the lights dropped, the laptop screen dimming before I could hit send. I waited. The room filled with the usual thick silence. A blackout in Karachi is never truly silent. You can usually hear a generator humming from a nearby building, or a distant TV powered by backup. But this one felt sealed. Contained. A few minutes later, I heard the elevator ding. I didn't move this time. I sat near the door, on the inside, back against the frame. Listening. No footsteps. No voices. Then, faintly, the sound of something wet moving across tile. Not dripping. Dragging. I stayed there, knees drawn up, trying to keep my breathing quiet. Eventually, the sound stopped. I don't know how much time passed. When I finally opened the door and looked out, the hall was empty. But again, just one footprint. This time farther down the corridor, as if someone, or something, had walked away from the elevator instead of toward it. In the morning, I asked the building manager about the 12th floor. He looked at me for a second too long before answering. "There's no 12th," he said flatly, as if it annoyed him. "But I saw." I started. He cut in. "People used to say things. Old rumors. Ignore them." I tried pressing. "What kind of things?" He just shook his head and repeated, "Ignore them." Then he walked away. Later that evening, I tried sleeping early. I left the lights off, as usual, and kept the windows open to let the air move. It was too humid to rest properly. My shirt stuck to my skin. The fan above clicked slowly. One blade was loose, swinging slightly with each rotation. Then I heard the intercom crackle. Just once. No ring. No voice. Just the sharp pop of static. I stood up, walked over to it, and picked up the receiver. Nothing. Just soft white noise, like the sound of wind through an empty hallway. I said, "Hello?" Silence. Then, just before I set it down, I heard breathing. Not fast. Not panicked. Just someone calmly existing on the other side of the line. I hung up. Immediately. The room felt smaller after that. The walls closer. I checked every lock twice. Closed the bathroom door. Turned the doorknob on the main entrance just to feel something solid respond under my hand. Then I noticed something I hadn't before. The light on my landline phone, the one the agent said hadn't worked since the wiring failed, was blinking. A missed call. I picked it up. The screen was blank. But the call log read, "Received, 9:58 p.m., no number." That's when I remembered, the first night I moved in, the power had gone at 9:58. Same minute. The same minute, every time since. Except tonight. Tonight it had come later. I don't know why that chilled me more than the rest. Something had shifted. It wasn't the routine anymore. It was watching the routine. Adjusting. Waiting for when I'd notice. That night I didn't sleep. Not because of the elevator. Not because of the intercom. But because sometime past midnight, I heard the water tap in the bathroom turn on by itself. Not fast. Not urgent. Just steady. As if someone had quietly decided to wash their hands. The next day I stayed in. Called off work with a vague excuse about stomach cramps and left my phone on silent. I didn't open the curtains. I didn't answer the door when the cleaning boy knocked once and left. I just stayed in bed with a glass of water and the AC on low, pretending that if I moved slowly enough, nothing would notice. The hallway outside was quiet during daylight. Always was. But the silence had taken on a different quality lately, not restful, not shy. Just unnaturally restrained. Like a waiting room no one ever leaves. Around noon, I found myself thinking about the elevator again. About the 12th floor that doesn't exist. Or maybe used to. I wasn't looking for answers anymore. I just wanted to understand what kind of thing watches you so closely and never blinks. I made myself a cup of tea, just the act of boiling water felt grounding, and sat near the intercom. Nothing crackled. No static. Still, I unplugged it. It wasn't paranoia. I just didn't want to wonder if it would start hissing again. Late afternoon, I took the stairs. Not for a walk. Not to escape. I just needed to move. Concrete underfoot. Hand on the rail. I started from the ground floor and climbed slowly, floor by floor. Counting. 4 flights. Then 5. Then 9. Everything matched. But between 11 and the rooftop, I noticed something I hadn't before. There was a narrow landing between the floors. Smaller than the rest. No markings. Just a gap between stair flights where the air felt slightly cooler. A blank wall. No door. But my feet hesitated there, just briefly, like something in my body recognized the space in a way my mind refused to name. I ran my fingers across the wall. Smooth concrete. No handle. No frame. Just silence. And then, faintly, the echo of a ding from below. The elevator. Not moving. Just announcing. As if something had entered. Or exited. I didn't go to the roof. I turned around and came back down in quick, quiet steps. The corridor outside my apartment was still. I unlocked my door and entered, closing it behind me like I was sealing something out. I didn't turn on any lights. The shadows inside were long but calm. I sat on the floor near the coffee table and listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No taps. No breathing through wires. I fell asleep like that, back against the couch. I woke to complete darkness. No lights. No hum from the fan. I glanced at the oven clock. 9:58. The same frozen minute. The exact second everything always began. Except this time, something felt different. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was hollow. I stood up slowly and walked to the front door. My hand hovered over the handle for a moment before I turned it. The hallway outside looked normal. Dim, empty. That faint glow from the stairwell behind the grate still flickered every few seconds. I walked to the elevator. The panel was dead. But the doors were slightly open. A vertical sliver of dark, thinner than a hand. I stood there and stared. No sounds. No movement. But the scent in the air had changed. Not rot. Not mildew. Something older. Like air trapped in a closed box for too long. Then, just once, the hallway bulb above me blinked, and in that split second, I saw a figure reflected in the metal of the elevator door. Not standing behind me. Not next to me. Inside the crack. Facing me. Very still. Not a clear face. Just the impression of one. Features drawn softly in shadow. Eyes that didn't reflect anything back. And in the next moment, the bulb held steady again. The reflection was gone. I didn't scream. I didn't even step back. I just turned and walked away. Not fast. Just carefully. Inside my apartment, I locked the door, unplugged every device, and sat again on the floor. I don't remember the rest of the night clearly. Time felt stitched together wrong. One moment I was seated. Then I was standing in the kitchen. Then I was sitting by the window, hands clenched too tightly, jaw sore. The lights never returned. At some point, I must have blacked out. The next morning, the building was normal again. People in the hallway. Power restored. Generator humming downstairs. I checked the elevator first thing. It stood closed. The panel lit. Buttons intact. No ding. I pressed the ground floor button and waited. The ride down was quiet. But just before it stopped, the panel blinked an unfamiliar number. Just for a second. Then it vanished. The doors opened to the ground floor. I stepped out and walked straight to the street. I didn't go back upstairs. I didn't wait to see if the intercom would crackle or the phone would ring from nowhere. I packed my things that afternoon and moved into a short-term guest house across town. No one from work asked why. I didn't offer. A few nights later, I looked up the building online. There was a news clipping, an archived article buried in a local newspaper site. The headline was vague: Elevator incident leaves one missing. The date was 2 years ago. The name of the resident was never released. Only that they lived on the unlisted service floor above 11, Originally closed during construction. I closed the browser and didn't save the link. I don't need to know who it was. I just know the elevator never really moved. And yet, somehow, it never stopped coming. It wasn't my first time at the farmhouse, but it felt like it. I hadn't been back since I was 14. I remembered the long road cutting through dry fields, the constant hum of insects at dusk, and the smell, damp earth and something older, like rust soaked in heat. It was my uncle's property. He died 3 months ago. No one wanted the land, not really. The family passed around vague plans to sell it, rent it, maybe level it. Nothing stuck. I offered to go up for a few days, check the place, take photos for the agent, and make sure the roof hadn't caved in during monsoon. They were grateful in that distant way families sometimes are, thanks over a call, no follow-up. The house sat alone, just off a narrow dirt road outside of Chichawatney. Sugarcane fields pressed in from every side, tall and swaying, thick enough to hide anything a few feet in. There were no neighbors for miles. I arrived in the late afternoon. The driver who dropped me off refused to stay. He didn't say much, just looked at the house once through the cracked windshield and said, "May nagay nahi jonga." I didn't press him. The house hadn't changed. Same yellow-white plaster, cracked in lines like veins. Same green wooden shutters, one permanently stuck halfway open. The porch creaked when I stepped on it, 3 short groans that sounded more deliberate than they should have. Inside was cleaner than expected. Dust, sure, and cobwebs in corners, but nothing rotten or broken. The air was heavy though. Still. Like it hadn't moved since the last time someone walked out and closed the door behind them. There was no electricity. The grid out here hadn't worked properly in years. The backup generator hadn't been started since probably the 90s. My uncle had used oil lanterns when he stayed. I found 2 in a cabinet, along with 3 glass bottles of kerosene and a box of matchsticks with a faded tiger on the front. I lit one lantern as the sun dropped. The light was soft, orange, and it cast slow, swinging shadows across the floorboards as I walked from room to room. I tried to keep myself occupied. Took photos of the furniture, measured out the main bedroom with a piece of string and an old measuring tape I found in the desk drawer. There was an odd comfort in the work. I found the mirror in the hallway. Oval-shaped. Black wood frame. Covered in a layer of brown cloth that had been nailed into the wall at the corners. It felt deliberate. I didn't touch it. That night, I slept in the small bedroom near the kitchen. The bed was low, with a hard mattress and a single flattened pillow. I kept the lantern on the floor near my feet. The wind outside had picked up, pushing the cane stalks against the outer walls in long, slow bursts. The sound was like the sea, distant and deep. I couldn't sleep. The air was too warm, the silence too alert. I kept thinking I heard something in the hallway. Not footsteps. Not speech. Just the sense of motion. At one point, I stood and cracked the door open. Nothing. Just the thin orange glow from the lantern, and the long hallway stretching toward the mirror. I closed the door again and sat on the bed. The lantern flickered. Briefly. The flame danced sideways like it had been breathed on. Then steadied. I waited. Nothing moved. But I couldn't shake the feeling I'd missed something. Not outside. Not behind me. Inside. The mirror came back into my head. I'd walked past it a dozen times. Always covered. Always ignored. Now I couldn't stop thinking about it. I told myself I was being childish. I stood again, lit the second lantern, and walked out into the hallway. The air was cooler there, oddly. Like the temperature dropped a few degrees just past the kitchen door. The mirror hung across from the old wall clock, which hadn't ticked in years. I touched the cloth. Rough fabric. Stiff with dust. The lantern light behind me cast a long shadow up the hall. I pulled one nail free. Just one. The cloth sagged slightly on the left side, revealing a sliver of glass. No reflection showed. I moved closer, angling the lantern higher. Still nothing. Just blackness in the exposed strip. No wall. No frame. No, me. I let go. The cloth fell back into place. I returned to the bedroom and shut the door softly behind me. The lantern on the floor had dimmed. The flame was smaller than before. Weak. Like it had burned faster than it should have. I checked the oil. Still half full. I turned the knob, tried to raise the wick. The flame sputtered, then brightened, then shrank again. I left it. Laid back down. And listened. To the cane stalks brushing the walls. To the clock that didn't tick. To the mirror that wasn't empty, but had nothing to show. I didn't sleep. I don't remember if I ever really closed my eyes. But when I looked at the lantern again, it was out. And the room was dark. The morning was gray. No sun broke through the window, only a soft, dull light like the sky had been wiped with ash. I woke up lying on my side, one arm pinned awkwardly beneath me, skin damp from the heat. The lantern beside the bed had gone cold. I checked the wick, it hadn't burned through. The fuel was still there. It had simply gone out. I stood and opened the window to let in air. The sugar cane rustled steadily outside, rows upon rows whispering to one another in a language just beyond recognition. I made tea the old way, using a camping stove from my bag. The kitchen smelled of metal and smoke. No birdsong. No passing tractors. Just the same stillness, unbroken since I'd arrived. As I drank, I glanced down the hallway. The cloth over the mirror looked exactly as I'd left it, slightly torn on one edge, slouched just enough to remind me what was behind it. I told myself not to think about it. To keep the day practical. I stepped outside around noon to check the boundary wall. Took photos, made mental notes of the cracks, the places where roots had begun to force their way through. The sunlight had a bleached quality, like it didn't touch the ground completely. I could hear insects, but I couldn't see a single one. That afternoon, I napped on the veranda. Just 20 minutes. When I woke up, I had the distinct feeling someone had been standing over me. Not touching, not watching. Just present. The kind of impression that lingers after someone has left the room. Back inside, I lit both lanterns early. One for the bedroom. One for the hallway. I didn't want to move through darkness again. The mirror stayed covered. But the sag in the cloth had worsened. I don't know why I kept looking at it. Something about the space it took up on the wall, like it was deeper than it should be. A black hole for light and attention. A place where the house forgot to exist. Later that evening, I heard something from the sitting room. A soft sound. Not sharp. Not loud. Just misplaced. I walked in, lantern raised. The room was empty. The curtains still drawn. The dust on the table undisturbed. Then I noticed the photograph. It was the one I remembered, a small framed picture of my uncle, standing outside the same house. Except now, the background was wrong. It was darker. Blurred. The window behind him, the one I now slept beside, was open in the photo. And someone stood inside, partly visible through the gap in the curtain. Not clear. Just the faint shape of a shoulder. A hint of a head. It hadn't been there before. I set the frame down without looking at it again. I should have left that night. But something held me there. Not out of fear. More like resignation. A sense that I'd already stayed too long for it to matter. Around 9, the wind picked up. Not a breeze, more like a low, constant push against the walls. The lantern in the hallway flickered. I walked over, lifted it gently. The light danced across the mirror cloth. And for a brief second I saw movement. Not in the glass, beneath the fabric. A shift. Like someone repositioning themselves on the other side. I didn't breathe. Didn't step closer. Just held the lantern still and watched. Nothing moved again. But I knew what I saw. The mirror wasn't blank. And it wasn't showing a reflection. I returned to the bedroom. Locked the door. Set the lantern on the floor and tried to read, even though the words blurred. The walls had taken on a kind of hum. Not sound. Not vibration. Just a low awareness. A pressure in the bones. The lantern's flame dipped suddenly. I checked it, plenty of oil, new wick. Still, it dimmed again. I turned it off and lit the second one. Same thing. A brief glow. Then it began to shrink, slow and steady, like the air around it was feeding on it. I left it burning anyway. The hallway beyond the door remained silent. No creaks. No steps. But I knew something had changed. At some point, I drifted into a light sleep. And I dreamed, but only in fragments. The sound of nails being pulled from wood. The feel of fabric brushing past my cheek. A reflection I couldn't see but felt staring back. When I woke, the lantern was cold. The room was black. And the bedroom door was slightly open. I never leave it open. The door hadn't opened all the way. Just enough to let the air change. The kind of gap that doesn't make noise but makes you aware of space where space wasn't. I lay still. Not out of fear, though fear was there, tightly held behind my ribs, but because I knew any movement might answer a question I didn't want asked. The lantern had gone out again. I could still smell the kerosene. Faint. Oily. The wick was cool between my fingers. I didn't light it. I stayed like that for what felt like half an hour, eyes open, watching the frame of the door shift with every small breath. Nothing came through. Nothing moved. But I kept waiting for it to. Eventually, I sat up. The boards under the bed creaked. That ordinary house sound. But it didn't comfort me anymore. It felt like permission had been given. I walked to the door and pushed it slowly. It didn't resist. The hallway beyond was dark. I knew where everything was, the shape of the mirror, the nail holes in the cloth, the crack in the tile halfway down, but in the dark, it felt like someone had taken all those details and rearranged them just slightly. Enough to keep the shape but remove the familiarity. I lit the lantern again. This time, it stayed on. Small, quiet, steady. I stepped into the hallway. The cloth on the mirror had fallen. It lay crumpled beneath the frame like shed skin. And the glass, it didn't show me. I stood in front of it, lantern held out. There was a room reflected. But not the one behind me. The mirror showed a hallway, similar in structure, but longer, narrower, and lit by a dim, orange glow I didn't recognize. At the far end of the reflection stood a doorway. Not open. Just there. I tilted the lantern slightly, trying to catch an angle where the reflection would snap back into place. It didn't. And then, in that hallway within the mirror, a figure moved. Not toward me. Just across. Briefly. Deliberately. A pale shape, no features, just the outline of a person passing from one unseen room to another. I stepped back. The lantern's flame bent sideways. Not from wind. The air was still. I didn't look at the mirror again. I walked to the kitchen, took both lanterns, and carried them into the sitting room. I stayed there, sitting on the floor between them, back against the wall. My chest felt tight. Not with panic. More like pressure, as if the house itself was pressing inward with slow, silent hands. There was nothing to do but wait. I tried calling someone the next morning. No signal. Even from the field, even after walking a good half-kilometer down the dirt road, holding my phone high above the stalks, nothing. Not even the emergency bar. That afternoon, I took the mirror off the wall. I wrapped it in a bedsheet, nailed the fabric back down with whatever tacks I could find, and shoved it under the cot in the guest room. I left it there. The house felt quieter afterward. But not empty. The wind stopped pushing the walls. The insects started up again outside. Still, something felt paused. Like whatever watched had simply closed its eyes for now. That night I packed my things. By lantern light, I folded clothes and zipped up bags, each sound magnified. Every soft scrape of fabric, every click of a zipper echoed. I told myself I'd leave before sunrise. Didn't matter that the agent hadn't called. Didn't matter if the gate was locked from the outside, I'd climb it. Walk the road until I found a signal or someone else. But when I woke, the clocks had stopped. Every one. The phone. My watch. The kitchen wall clock that hadn't worked since I arrived. All showed 4:03 a.m. The sky outside was black. No edge of dawn. I lit a lantern. It died within a minute. I tried the second. It flared, then shrank to a pin-sized flame, guttered, and went out. No oil problem. No wind. Just refusal. The darkness was complete. I sat on the bed, hands open on my knees, breathing slowly. And I waited. Because I understood then, it wasn't just the mirror. It was the house. Or rather, something that remembered the house the way it used to be. Something that had lived in the gaps between use and neglect. Something that didn't want to be found, but didn't like being ignored. The lanterns were never meant to stay lit. The mirror was never meant to stay covered. And I was never meant to leave. Eventually, the power returned. Briefly. The light bulb above my head flickered once, then went solid. I could see the walls again. The door frame. My bag. I stood. Walked to the window. The fields outside were still. Utterly still. As if the wind had stopped mid-breath. And standing just at the edge of the sugarcane, where the dirt road vanished behind the first thick stalks, was a figure. Not moving. Not clear. Just standing. Facing the house. Watching. The lights went out again. The flame never returned.